Welcome, dear dreamer, to the Scandalous Historian. Tonight, we slip into sandals made of leather too thin to ward off the chill, into robes coarse enough to chafe the skin, into a life not marked by passion or politics, but by discipline, silence, and unrelenting piety. You are about to step into the cloister. Stone corridors that echo only with footsteps, air that smells of wax, damp wool, and sometimes of boiled vegetables turned too long on the hearth. Tonight, we explore the quiet and uncomfortable world of the medieval monk. But before we begin this slow descent into the monastic halls of the past, if this journey brings you peace, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. And in the comments below, share your country's flag. We'd love to see where in the world our fellow dreamers are listening from. Don't forget to turn on notifications for a new sleepy story every night. Now, draw your blanket closer, let the world grow still, and imagine yourself not in a palace, not on a battlefield, but in the hush of a small, narrow cell, where a single candle flickers beside a wooden bowl of cabbage soup. And nothing, truly nothing is yours, except your prayers. Imagine now that you were 15 years old. Your father, a minor nobleman with debts and too many sons, has made a decision. One of you must take the cloth. Not because of a sudden burst of religious devotion, but because this is practical. One fewer mouth to feed. One more soul, perhaps, to pray for the family's standing in the next life. And for you, the second or third or fourth son, it means no inheritance, no land. Only this, the monastery. You arrive before dawn. The gates are thick and wooden, wrapped with iron. The stone walls rise higher than you expected. Not a castle, there are no turrets, but it feels just as sealed. You step inside and the air seems different already, heavier, cooler. There are no welcome banners, no smiling monks, only quiet. A brother, perhaps in his 40s, with a face carved into solemnness, nods and gestures you inside. He does not speak. You walk across damp stone. A passage lined with torches leads you inward, past rows of wooden doors and out into a cloister, an open square of winter-bitten grass surrounded by arcades. Beyond it, the chapel rises. And there, your life begins. They strip you of your name, not harshly, not cruelly, but thoroughly. You are no longer Thomas, or Benoit, or Johann. You are now Brother Silvanus, or Brother Peter, or simply Brother. You are given a robe. It is undyed wool, grayish, coarse, heavy when wet, a belt of rope, a pair of shoes, worn and mended. You are led to your cell. It is no more than a cupboard, a narrow bed, a prayer stool, a single shelf for the rule and the psalter. There is no mirror. There will not be one again for many years. And then begins the rhythm. Because life in the monastery is not defined by whim or choice or even seasons. It is defined by bells. The first bell rings before the sun rises, matins, the night office. You wake in darkness. You dress not because you feel cold, but because it is time. Always, it is time. Time to pray, time to kneel, time to speak words older than your understanding pay. Chapel is cold. The air within it carries the chill of stone. Your breath hangs faintly in front of your face. You kneel beside brothers you hardly know. The chant begins, low, measured, Latin mostly, monotone. You do not yet know the verses by heart, so your lips move in hesitation. The voices around you do not pause. They rise and fall like wind against the cliffs. Matins gives way to lauds, then prime, then terce, then sext, then none, then vespers, then compline. 7 times a day, every day, forever.
The rule of Saint Benedict is not cruel, but it is strict. It tells you when to eat, when to speak, when to sleep. It tells you that silence is holy, that humility is the highest virtue, that laughter is pride made sound. You learn to lower your eyes when addressed. You learn to wash your hands before handling a holy book. You learn never to touch food before giving thanks. Food, by the way, is not why anyone comes here. A monk eats simply, porridge thickened with barley, cabbage boiled to softness, sometimes beans, lentils. On feast days, a sliver of fish. Once or twice a year, cheese. Meat is rare. In many monasteries, forbidden. There is bread, but it is brown, dense. You dip it in broth not because it improves the taste, but because otherwise it may not yield to your teeth. You eat in silence. A single brother reads aloud from Scripture or from the writings of a saint. His voice echoes through the refectory. His tone is steady as the ticking of water against a barrel. You may not look at him. You may not speak. You eat what you are given. You eat slowly. You eat entirely. Waste is a sin. And then there is work. You do not simply pray. You tend the gardens. You mend robes. You copy texts, if your Latin is strong enough. You dig trenches, you draw water. You clean the privy trenches. Sometimes you are assigned to serve in the infirmary, washing the feet of sick brothers, spooning broth into mouths no longer able to speak. Work is prayer. Each stroke of the hoe, each stitch in the hem, each page copied with care. These too are offerings to God. It is not an easy life, but it is quiet, and over time your mind grows still. Not empty, but ordered. The silence once oppressive becomes a kind of sound in itself. You begin to hear your own thoughts less sharply. They come not in bursts, but in drift. You measure time not in days, but in psalms. Not in seasons, but in feast days. Michaelmas, Epiphany, Pentecost. And though your back aches from kneeling and your hands stiffen with cold, you begin to belong. Not to the world, but to this place, to its rhythm, to its restraint. The chill of the cloister never really leaves your bones. Even in summer, the stone beneath your feet holds on to the cold like a memory. It's a different kind of cold, dry, ancient, and patient. It doesn't bite sharply like the wind off the hills, but rather seeps through layers of wool and into your spine, quietly, insistently. The monks speak little of it. They endure it, as they do all things. Your sandals are thin. A mercy, you were told. Humility in dress brings you closer to God. And so, the leather wears down over time, shaped by the rhythm of your days. Rising before dawn, kneeling on stone, pacing slowly through shadows cast by unlit candles. The only sound the soft rustle of robes and the squeak of wooden doors. The cold, the silence, the routine, they are not punishments. They are gifts. At least that is what you are taught. The rule of Saint Benedict, after all, is clear. Stability, obedience, and conversion of life. These are your vows, and comfort is not among them.
You remember the day you arrived. The world outside the walls had grown too loud, too unpredictable. Your family, modest landowners though not noble, had offered you to the church. It was a common path. Fewer mouths to feed, a soul dedicated to service, a source of quiet pride. You were not asked, you were told. And so you crossed the threshold with your head bowed, shedding your name in exchange for a robe, a tonsure, and a life ordered not by whim, but by bell.
Time moves differently here. Not quickly, not even slowly, but in a loop. A rhythm that repeats itself, again and again, wearing a gentle groove into the soul like water against stone. Each day feels the same, each week much like the one before it. And still, things change. You do not mark the months by festivals or markets, or the changing fashion of clothing. You own nothing new, after all, but by the color of the sky beyond the cloister walk. Spring smells of wet soil. Summer brings light into the chapel during morning prayers. Autumn means more sweeping, leaves caught in corners. Winter means cold that creeps beneath the robe, deep into the joints, and still, the bells ring, and you rise, and you chant. The hardest part of the life is not the labor. It is not the food. It is not the discomfort. It is the self, the slow, quiet fading of it. In the world beyond the walls, men build, they argue, they name their children, leave behind goods, homes, stories. Here, in the cloister, you are asked to do the opposite, to forget your name, to curb your wants, to empty your pride. You are not nothing, but you are not yours. Your voice belongs to the choir. Your hands to the work. Your thoughts, ideally, to God alone. There are moments of struggle. They're quiet, but persistent. Sometimes they arrive in the stillness of early morning, when the others rise and you, just for a moment, consider not moving. What if you didn't? What if you stayed beneath the wool blanket, let the darkness pass around you? But you rise anyway, not because you want to, but because you must, because that is the life. Other times the struggle comes with memory, a festival once attended with your brothers, the smell of roasted meat from your childhood home, the sound of your mother humming to herself as she spun thread. These memories arrive unbidden. You are not supposed to long for them, but you do, quietly, briefly, like a breath held too long. And then you release it, and you return to the Psalter. There are also temptations, not of flesh, not in this place where bodies are cloaked and glanced at only in the most practical sense, but of thought, of pride. You feel it when you sing a verse more cleanly than another, when you copy a passage with more flourish, when the abbot nods slightly after you present your work. Pride is the sin most warned against, because it is the most subtle, and it can survive even in silence. Toto, where things unlore. Some brothers falter. One disappears into long fasts, his eyes growing hollow, his knees bruised from over-prayer. Another stops speaking even when permitted, retreating entirely into muteness. These are not acts of holiness. They are signs of strain. The abbot watches, he counsels, gently, firmly. He has seen it before. Too much withdrawal is not devotion. It is a kind of vanishing. And even here, the goal is not to vanish. It is to offer yourself, steadily, without collapse. You learn, over time, that not all monks are saints. Some mutter in frustration when a task is repeated. Some doze during vigils. Some tuck an extra piece of bread beneath their robes. You learn to forgive them, because you, too, are not perfect.
And because the rule says, bear patiently the infirmities of others, not their wounds, their weaknesses, their humanity.
Still, there are moments of peace. Walking in the cloister garden, trimming rosemary, the sun hitting a page just right as you copy a capital letter in red ink, the silence after Compline, when the chapel is dark and the candles extinguished, and the only sound is your own breath. It is not joy, perhaps, but it is enough. Imagine a place where decades pass beneath the same roof, where sons never become fathers, where no one speaks a name not given by the order, where the world outside continues, kings rise, cities fall, wars rage, and inside, the rhythm never changes. That is the monastery, a sealed world, a breathing archive, a quiet economy all its own. You begin to notice how complete it is. The garden feeds the table, the sheep give wool for robes, the beeswax becomes candles. The scriptorium produces books for the library or for trade. And the brothers tend it all. There is no need for coin or conversation with outsiders, except on rare, approved occasions. Here, the world is circular. Your day begins, as always, with the bell. It guides you from the stillness of your cell into the morning hush of the cloister. You walk past stone columns damp with dew, past wooden doors worn smooth by generations of silent hands, and you feel it. This place has been lived in for centuries. You are only the current breath in a much longer exhale. The names of the brothers who came before you are etched into the walls. Some are buried beneath the floor of the chapel. You step over them each morning as you go to pray. Not as strangers, but as predecessors. Each brother has his role. Some tend the herb garden, sage, rue, wormwood, and chamomile. Plants to ease pain, soothe fever, calm the stomach. Others work in the infirmary. Here, medicine and mercy blend quietly. There are no dramatic cures, no shouted prayers, just poultices, warm broth, rest. You may be assigned to the scriptorium, a small room dimly lit, quiet save for the scratching of quills on parchment. Here you learn the delicate rhythm of copying, not just words, but holy words. You dare not make a mistake. Each stroke is an act of devotion. Each illuminated letter a praise rendered in color. The ink smells of gall and vinegar. The parchment is stretched calfskin. Your hands ache by midday. Still, you continue. Because these books may one day outlive you. They may reach places you never will. There is pride in this work, though you are taught not to name it. To bind a book, to prepare ink, to create something beautiful in a world that expects you to have given up beauty, that is its own quiet defiance. But it is a defiance permitted because it is done for God and for the preservation of wisdom. Some monasteries become wealthy over time. They are given land, donations, even relics, a finger bone of a saint, a shred of holy cloth. Pilgrims come, heads bowed, palms open. You may be assigned to greet them, not with words, but with bread, with a basin for washing, with a place to kneel. Hospitality is a sacred duty. Even here, even in silence, the stranger is welcomed. Because you never know, as the rule says, when that stranger might be an angel. And though you rarely leave, the outside world reaches in. Merchants come to trade. Parchment, ink, grain, beeswax. Messengers bring news. A bishop has died. A war has begun. The Pope has issued a new decree. But you do not comment. You do not speculate. You do not dwell.
That is not your life now. Yours is a different kingdom. One not of politics, but of prayer. And yet, some nights you lie awake and wonder what the world looks like now.
Has the tree by the market gate grown tall? Do the spring fairs still fill the air with songs and wine and bright cloth? You cannot ask, so you close your eyes, and you pray, or you sleep, or both.
Time in a monastery does not pass loudly. There are no birthdays celebrated, no holidays marked with bright colors or dancing. The changing of years is noted with small variations. Perhaps a new robe distributed, a different saint honored, a subtle shift in leadership if the abbot has passed on. And so, age arrives not as a sudden visitor, but as a slow companion. You wake one morning and realize your knees do not bend quite so easily. The steps across the cloister feel longer than they once did. The ink from the scriptorium stains your fingers more deeply now, for your skin is thinner. You are older, not yet elderly, but you feel the weight of the seasons. Still, you rise, you chant, you work. The rule remains. The bells still ring. There is no retirement in the cloister, no pasture to retire to, no family waiting with open arms, no wealth to enjoy. And yet, your life has grown full in its own way. You know every crack in the flagstones. You can walk the chapel in total darkness. You can hum entire psalms without the page. The younger brothers look to you now, not with awe, but with a quiet respect. They mimic your pace. They listen when you speak, though you rarely do. When you rise to offer a reading, they straighten a little, because you have lasted. And that, here, is its own form of honor. Your labor changes. No longer sent to mend roofs or dig ditches, you are given gentler tasks. Organizing scrolls, preparing herbs, helping to write the necrology, the record of those who have passed into God's hands. And when a brother falls ill, you sit with him. You know the verses that comfort. You know the right way to cool a forehead, to turn a frail body without pain, because you, too, are closer to that final silence. When the time comes, there is no panic. Your cough grows deeper, your limbs grow thinner, you sleep more. The prior visits, speaks with gentle words. You are given less work, more time for prayer. The bell still rings, for you too, but you no longer rise for matins. Your meals are brought to your cell. The candle beside your bed is relit each dusk, though it no longer needs to be. Your nights are filled not with reading, but with memory. And the Psalms, once struggled through in Latin syllables, now live within you. You do not fear death. You have practiced for it your entire life. And so, the life of a medieval monk ends as it was lived. Without wealth, without drama, without legacy as the world would define it, but with rhythm, with constancy, with grace. A life poured out in countless unseen acts. Each chant, each pen stroke, each silent act of patience, forming something sacred, not through spectacle, but through endurance. And now, dear dreamer, you may gently step back from the cloister. Let your breath deepen. Let your thoughts slow. The cell is behind you. The chapel fades into stillness. The stone walls no longer press in. You are free to carry forward only the calm, only the sense of time slowed, of words repeated into peace. Imagine yourself now in the hills of Bohemia. The year is 1370, and the village of Husinek sits quietly among forests and fields. Stone houses cluster around a church, and the days pass much like they always have. Sowing, tending, praying, surviving. It is here that a child is born. They name him Jan. His family is not powerful. His prospects, like most, are narrow. But there is something about him, stillness, clarity, an inward steadiness that marks him early. And though his village is small, the world he will step into is vast and troubled. Jan Hus grows into a young man with a gift for language. He walks the long miles to Prague to study. There, at Charles University, he finds a world larger than anything he knew. Debates in Latin, books copied in silence, minds from across Europe gathered in one place. He takes holy orders. Not for wealth, there is none, but for understanding. And there, within the church itself, something begins to shift inside him. Not rage, not arrogance, but discomfort. The church in these years is not a monolith of goodness. It is powerful. It is wealthy. It is divided. The papacy has split, two men in different cities, both claiming to be pope. Clergy grow rich from indulgences. Positions are bought and sold, and sermons are often wrapped in layers of privilege that the poor cannot reach. Jan listens and watches and begins to preach differently. He speaks in Czech, not Latin, so the people can understand.
He preaches not from ornate texts, but from Scripture itself. He questions the selling of indulgences. He calls for reform, not revolution, not rebellion, but cleansing, a return to simplicity, to Scripture, to Christ. His sermons at Bethlehem Chapel draw crowds. He does not shout. He does not threaten. He teaches.
The authorities watch. Some are amused, some annoyed, a few grow concerned. Because Jan's voice carries, not only in Prague, but beyond. His words copied and carried to countryside villages, to students, to merchants, to those who have long felt that something was wrong. Still, Jan remains within the church. He writes, he teaches, he appeals to reason. He believes still in dialogue. But the world does not always favor dialogue. Power moves behind curtains. Decisions are made by men far away. And in 1414, Jan Hus is summoned to the Council of Constance, a grand gathering of clerics and kings, meant to resolve the schism in the church and restore order. He is promised safe conduct. He travels across Europe slowly, by cart, by foot, through villages and cold fields over muddy roads. He prays as he goes, not for triumph, but for clarity. He still believes he can explain. When he arrives, the promises crumble. He is arrested, not tried, not questioned, just imprisoned. The cell is damp, the light dim. He grows ill. And still he writes, not with anger, but with purpose. Letters to friends, prayers, sermons that will never be spoken aloud. He is not naive, but he is not bitter. The prison cell at Constance is narrow. Damp air settles on the stone like mist that never lifts. The straw beneath Jan's body is flattened from restless nights, and the single window, high and barred, lets in little light. He is not tortured, but he is left alone, and that too can be its own kind of pain. The council goes on without him. Debates about popes, power, doctrine, but his name hovers like smoke around every chamber. He is dangerous, not because he wields force, but because he speaks plainly, and people have begun to listen. He is brought before the council several times,
Each time the bishops speak more than he does. They read his writings aloud, excerpts chosen with care, framed as threats. They ask him to recant, to denounce his own words. But he hesitates, not because he wants to provoke, but because to recant would be to lie. He will yield on some things. He will clarify. He will listen. But he will not deny that the church should reflect the gospel. He will not say indulgences are holy. He will not pretend that wealth absolves sin. And so they grow tired of waiting.
The day is set. July 6th, 1415.
The morning begins early. He is taken from his cell, led through the stone corridors of the bishop's palace. The guards do not jeer. The priests do not bless him. He walks in silence. The hall where the council meets is filled with color. Robes, mitres, gold thread, jeweled crosses. Jan, by contrast, wears only a plain tunic. His hair, once tonsured in service to the church, is now long and dull, his feet bare. He is not allowed to speak for long. He attempts to address the council. They interrupt. He begins again. They cut him off. The decision has already been made.
He is condemned as a heretic. Stripped of his priesthood, led from the hall. And outside, the crowds wait. The place of execution is just beyond the city walls. Not a grand spectacle, no stage, no banners, just a pile of wood, a post in the ground, and a few guards. As he walks, Jen prays quietly, a psalm, most likely. Something familiar, something steady. They tie him to the stake, not cruelly, not kindly. The wood is arranged carefully around his feet, dry bundles beneath his robe, oiled straw to catch easily. There is no great cry, no final speech shouted into the smoke, only stillness, and then silence. The wood blackens, the robes collapse, the crowd disperses, and the council returns to its business. But something changes. Not that day, not that week, but in the years that follow. His followers, the Hussites, carry his message into the countryside. His sermons, copied by hand, are read in hidden rooms, and the quiet fire he lit does not go out. It glows in the words of later thinkers. It sparks uprisings. It reshapes nations. And yet, Jan Hus never meant to start a war. He did not raise a sword. He asked only that the church listen, that priests live humbly, that the poor understand the word, that salvation could not be sold. The flame that took Jan Hus was meant to end something, to cauterize a wound in the church, to warn others, to seal away dissent with fire and silence. But it did not end. It changed shape. In Bohemia, word of his death spread slowly. Whispers in taverns. Quiet prayers muttered in the fields. A priest refuses to speak the Pope's name during Mass. A merchant refuses to pay indulgence fees. And then, more openly, preachers take up his words. They speak of Scripture in the people's language. They read Christ's teachings aloud, without gold, without ceremony. They say salvation cannot be bought, that bread and wine need no bishop's blessing. The people listen, because Huss, in death, becomes something he never sought, a symbol. The Hussite movement begins not in rebellion, but in worship. Congregations gather in barns, on hillsides, by riverbanks. They chant not in Latin, but in Czech. They serve the Eucharist to everyone, not just priests. They teach that God is not confined to cathedral walls. And at first, the church watches with a familiar patience. But soon, patience turns to fear, because this is not a lone monk, not a quiet voice in the woods. This is a tide. In Prague, tensions rise. Priests sympathetic to Hus are removed. Public processions are attacked. A crowd storms the new town hall. City officials are thrown from windows. It is called the first defenestration of Prague. It is not the last. What began as preaching turns to protest. What began as sermons becomes war. The Hussite Wars begin in 1419. For over a decade, Bohemia is in conflict. Not armies of kings, but citizens, farmers, monks, scholars. They take up arms, not to conquer, but to defend. They form mobile fortresses, wagon circles fortified with shields and pikes. They march behind banners bearing the chalice, symbol of communion for all. Their leader, Jan Žižka, is a general unlike any other. Old, blind in one eye, then both, but tactically brilliant. Under him, peasants defeat knights. Commoners rout trained armies. It is not because of hatred, it is because they believe in the word, in Hus, in a truth not owned by Rome. But war, even in faith, is still war. Villages burn, fields go fallow, families split, some loyal to the Pope, others to the chalice. Even the Hussites fracture. Moderates and radicals disagree. Disputes turn violent, all under the banner of reform. The quiet teachings of Jan Hus are pulled in every direction. Still, something remains. Not in the battles, but in the persistence. The idea that truth can be read, that faith can be shared, that silence, even unto death, is not weakness. It is this memory that outlasts the fire. Time has a strange way of preserving certain names. Not the loudest, not always the most powerful, but those whose words touched something deeper, whose message, however quiet, struck a chord that could not be silenced. Jan Hus is one of those names. Though he died in 1415, his legacy did not disappear with the embers. It lingered, in whispers, in sermons, in song. The years after the Hussite Wars were complicated. Bohemia stood alone in many ways, neither fully Catholic nor fully independent. The Church reasserted its control, carefully, strategically. Some Hussite practices were quietly absorbed, others condemned. But the memory of Hus never left the land. In Prague, statues would one day rise in his honor. Streets would bear his name. And his words, simple, firm, gentle, would be quoted again and again, not as rebellion, but as clarity. In the 16th century, the Reformation would erupt across Europe. Martin Luther, another monk troubled by indulgences, would nail his theses to a church door in Wittenberg. And when asked who inspired him, Luther would say plainly, "We are all Hussites." The seeds Hus planted, of a faith returned to Scripture, of a church accountable to its people, took root in soil far beyond Bohemia. They grew in Switzerland, in Germany, in England. And still the man himself remained a quiet figure, never lionized with swords or crowns, never claimed as conqueror, only as a preacher, a teacher, a man who stood by his truth. Even now, more than 600 years later, his memory is kept. In Czechia, July 6th is marked as a national holiday, Jan Hus Day, not for nationalism, but for courage, for conscience. In hushed chapels and open squares, his image is remembered not with fire, but with flowers. And perhaps that is the true shape of legacy. Not grand, not loud, but steady. A life lived quietly, a truth spoken gently, a death accepted calmly, and from it, a movement that reshaped the world. Let us now step gently back from the smoke and sermons, from Bohemia's battlefields and candlelit churches, from the steadfast figure who faced the flames, and carry forward only this, that some of history's most powerful changes do not come from violence or volume, but from a single voice, firm, clear, and unafraid to be still. Imagine yourself in a dim room lit by filtered sunlight. It is silent save for the gentle rasp of a quill moving across vellum. You are seated at a long wooden desk, surrounded by shelves of thick hand-bound books, each one stitched and painted with the devotion of months, even years. This is the scriptorium, the workshop of the medieval world's most meticulous minds. Here, texts are not just copied, they are transformed. An illuminated manuscript is more than a book. It is a canvas of quiet beauty. Gold leaf gleams from the page like a whisper of light. Borders swirl with vines, flowers, and curious creatures. Large capital letters burst into ornate blossoms of color and form. The texts themselves might be sacred. The Psalms, the Gospels, the Book of Hours. But around them, in the margins, is where something else lives. A secret world. One that speaks not always with reverence, but with wit. Not always with doctrine, but with delight. These are the marginalia. A dancing rabbit wielding a sword, a monk with the head of a snail, a knight fighting a frog the size of a child, a cat playing the harp. At first it may seem like nonsense, childish scribbles on holy texts. But look closer. There is meaning. The artists, monks mostly, though some were lay professionals, knew that margins were freedom. The main text could not be altered. It must be perfect, unchanging, sacred. But the edges? The edges were personal. And so they became a playground for satire, for commentary, for quiet resistance. Imagine copying a sermon on virtue for 6 hours straight, only to tuck into the corner a tiny image of a fox in a bishop's robe, preaching to a flock of gullible chickens. A joke? Yes. But also, perhaps, a message. Let's begin with the animals. They are everywhere. Rabbits chase hunters, dogs wear armor, snails duel knights. The snail is especially curious. It appears again and again, facing off with brave warriors, standing firm against men 3 times its size. What does it mean? Some scholars suggest it was a symbol of cowardice. Others believe it represented the slow inevitability of death. Still others think it was simply a visual pun, a reminder not to take the page too seriously. And perhaps all of them are right, because meaning in these margins is layered, not declared. Then there are the grotesques, twisted faces, long tongues, bodies part human and part beast. They leer, they sprawl, they grin from the corners of the sacred. Were they meant to shock? Perhaps, but more likely, they were meant to remind that even in holiness, the world is not without shadow, that sin, temptation, and folly are always nearby, sometimes ridiculous, sometimes frightening, that we must laugh at them or be consumed by them. To understand the code of a manuscript, you must slow down. These are not pages meant to be skimmed. They're meant to be dwelled in. And when you give them your patience, let us begin with gold. Illumination, quite literally, means to light up. Gold was used not merely for beauty, but to reflect the divine. The heavenly realm, unreachable and perfect, was painted with real light. Sheets of gold leaf pressed into glue and polished with a smooth stone until it gleamed. It caught the eye. It made the holy shimmer. But gold had more than aesthetic purpose. It was placement that mattered. If Christ's halo shimmered with it, but a bishop's did not. If a border shone with gold while the center did not. These were subtle signals meant to shape focus, imply hierarchy, or sometimes quietly challenge it.
Then there were the colors. Each pigment told its own story. Ultramarine blue, the deep, rich blue from crushed lapis lazuli, was rare and expensive, often reserved for Mary's robes. It wasn't just beautiful, it was devotional. To paint her in blue was to offer reverence in mineral form. Red lead gave a warm, living hue, used to highlight names or mark transitions. Green came from verdigris, scraped from copper, unpredictable and toxic to the page if not treated carefully. Black ink was iron gall, made from oak galls, iron salts, and vinegar. It stained deeply, permanently. A quiet metaphor, perhaps, for the word itself. But symbolism went beyond color. The poses of figures mattered. A hand raised in blessing, a foot turned away, an animal curled at a saint's side. Not merely decoration, but allegory. The lamb was not just gentle, it was sacrifice. The lion not just fierce, but resurrected. The peacock, oddly enough, became a symbol of immortality, because people believed its flesh did not decay. Then, there were numbers. 3, of course, holy. The Trinity, the 3 days between death and resurrection. You might find 3 flowers on a border, 3 stars above a figure's head, 3 steps leading up to a throne. 7 appeared often too. The 7 virtues, the 7 deadly sins. 9, the orders of angels. Even the number of petals on a flower or the points of a star held meaning to the trained eye. Illuminators also used positioning to encode ideas. A saint standing above a devil. Order preserved. An animal perched in the margin near a particular psalm. Perhaps an illustration of the text's message. Or a grotesque, glaring up from the bottom of a page, mocking the solemnity above it. These were not mistakes. They were not idly placed. They were crafted, layered, deliberate. In the quiet of the scriptorium, hour after hour, the monk writes, not as an author, but as a copyist, a vessel for repetition. His back aches, the candle flickers. The ink thickens slightly in the inkwell. His eyes blur from tracing the same curved letters over and over again. But then, just at the bottom of a page, he scratches a line so deeply human, it reaches across centuries. Please let this book be finished. It is not part of the prayer, not part of the psalm, not even part of the rubric or notes. It is a sigh, a small, honest moment, hidden in the margins of eternity. These little additions, known today as colophons, are some of the rarest and most revealing parts of manuscript culture. They tell us who the scribe was, what the weather was like, what time he finished copying, how tired he was. I am very cold. One monk writes. The parchment is hairy, says another. Thank God it is done, sighs a third. In a world where humility was expected, where personal identity was often erased in favor of devotion, these moments are like footprints in the snow, brief, faint, but very real. Sometimes, scribes inserted small portraits of themselves, not grand, regal self-portraits, but humble, almost apologetic. A tiny monk in the bottom corner, kneeling beside a giant quill. A cartoonish figure with ink-stained fingers bowing before the Virgin Mary. One even depicted himself asleep at his desk, drooling onto a half-finished page. There was humor, too. A mouse chasing a cat. A man playing bagpipes with his nose. A nun riding a snail. These were not errors. They were moments of levity inserted into long hours of labor. Perhaps a way to stay sane, or a way to wink at the reader. Because monks knew they were not alone. Even centuries ago, they knew the page would be seen again. And so, in the middle of all the holy words and serious doctrine, they left a little smile. Mistakes, too, speak volumes. A letter repeated, a line skipped, an accidental smudge of ink that blossoms like a flower in the corner. Some scribes would note their own errors. "Forgive me, I was sleepy." Others would add corrections above or beside the mistake, carefully, meticulously, because even in fatigue the work mattered. And still, it was often thankless. Most scribes remained anonymous, their pages bound into volumes, carried far from the place they were made, their careful lines read aloud in chapels they never saw, their illustrations admired by nobles who would never know their names. Yet they continued. Mystery. Imagine a book, not printed, not mass-produced, but crafted by hand, letter by letter, stroke by careful stroke, gold pressed onto parchment with a breath held tight, a binding stitched with linen thread, wrapped in wood, then leather. Now, imagine that book lying on a shelf. For 600 years, and still intact. The survival of an illuminated manuscript is in itself a quiet miracle. Many did not last. Fire, damp, war, and human carelessness claimed countless pages. Libraries were looted, scriptoria dissolved, books scraped clean and rewritten, recycled for newer, more pressing needs. And yet, some survived. Often not because of who wrote them, but because of who guarded them. Monks, librarians, archivists, collectors, even humble parish priests who tucked old volumes into hidden cupboards during times of unrest. These hands, unknown, uncelebrated, carried the fragile weight of memory forward. In monastic libraries, the manuscripts were cared for like relics, shelved by subject, wrapped in cloth, checked for wormholes, dusted carefully, one by one. The library itself was often built for preservation. Thick walls, few windows, high shelves. Temperature mattered, so did light. Too much sun would fade the ink. Too much moisture would rot the parchment. So they kept the rooms dim, cool, still. A place where books could sleep in peace. Some manuscripts were chained to desks, not out of punishment, but protection. A heavy iron chain ran from the spine to a metal bar, long enough to allow reading, but not removal. This system, called a chained library, still exists in a few places today, and the effect when you see it is sobering. Books as precious as gold, literally tethered to the place where knowledge was shared. When the printing press arrived in the 15th century, everything changed. Books could now be produced in hundreds, then thousands, faster, cheaper, more accessible, and many illuminated manuscripts were quietly forgotten, stored away, unopened, unneeded. But even as their use faded, their beauty remained. Collectors, centuries later, would rediscover them. Scholars would begin to catalog them. and today they sit in glass cases, admired not only for their content, but for their craftsmanship. A Bible, once copied by candlelight for a quiet abbey in France, now rests in a climate-controlled vault in London. A book of hours, once read by a noble woman before bed, now scanned in digital detail for scholars across the world. And perhaps most touching of all, some of these manuscripts still bear the marks of those who used them. Fingerprints in the margins, candle soot on the edges, a petal pressed between the pages, even a tear stain, faint but real, where a reader once paused too long on a prayer for the dead. These are not just books, they are witnesses to devotion, to labor, to time. So now, dear dreamer, if you ever find yourself in the quiet hush of a museum gallery, facing one of these glowing pages, slow your breath, lean close, and listen. For even now the gold still catches the light, the vines still curl, the snail still faces the night, and somewhere across centuries, a tired scribe smiles because someone is still looking. Imagine the hush of a great stone hall. Not empty, never that, but reserved. Polished wooden floors, arched ceilings lost in shadow, tapestries catching the faint light of flickering torches. This is no ordinary feast. This is a bishop's table, and tonight it will groan beneath the weight of ceremony, expectation, and food. The bishop is not just a spiritual figure. He is a landholder, a political player, a man whose robes shimmer with gold thread, whose ring marks him as both shepherd and statesman. He presides not only over churches, but over estates, not only over masses, but over markets. And so, when he feasts, it is not merely for pleasure, it is a statement of power, of stability, of grace. The banquet begins with procession. Guests arrive in order of rank: clergy, nobles, courtiers, wealthy merchants, all assign seats with careful calculation. Who sits beside whom? Who faces the dais? Who is permitted to speak, and who only to listen? Each place is marked by a clean linen cloth, pewter or silver vessels, and a basin for washing hands. The water is perfumed with rosemary. The towels, warmed by the hearth. This, before a single bite is taken. Clean hands, clean hearts, at least in theory. Then come the prayers. A blessing offered in Latin, chanted perhaps, or spoken by a subordinate cleric. There is no applause, no laughter yet. Only the soft shifting of robes, the rustle of sleeves. And then, finally, the first course. It is modest, a soup, perhaps barley thickened with eggs, or a broth of chicken and herbs. The bishop eats first. Others follow his lead. Bread is passed, crusty, dark, thick with grain. Butter softens on wooden boards. There may be olives brought from warmer lands, hard cheese, salted fish, simple foods, but chosen with care, and the wine, watered as custom dictates, but aged and fragrant. No one overindulges, not yet. The early courses are restrained. But as the evening unfolds, so too does the meal. From kitchen hearths come heavier platters, pies, savory and golden, goose glazed in honey, pork stuffed with herbs and apples, a whole salmon, poached in spiced wine
its skin peeled back to reveal tender, steaming flesh. Spices, cinnamon, clove, pepper, signal wealth. For these come from far-off lands, carried over mountains and sea. To season freely is to display more than taste. It is to say, I am connected. I am powerful.
Conversation begins to rise. Quiet at first, then livelier, still courteous, still structured. A question about a sermon, a remark on a recent court case, perhaps a light jest about a neighboring diocese. The bishop responds with practiced ease. He is gracious, measured. He does not reveal too much, but neither is he silent. His role is not only to lead in prayer, but in politics, and the banquet hall is one of his pulpits.
The hall is warmer now. The candles have burned lower, their wax pooling softly in iron holders. And with each passing course, the hush of formality softens into something looser, though still composed. Laughter, cautious but genuine, ripples along the table. Wine is refilled with practiced discretion. The bishop smiles, controlled, thoughtful, but clearly enjoying the night's progression. This is not gluttony, not revelry. This is the performance of refinement. From a curtained alcove near the rear of the hall, a soft strum emerges. A musician, or perhaps two, likely hired for the evening. A harp, gentle and lyrical, a lute, its notes warm and steady. They play not songs for dancing, but for listening. A ballad in Latin, a familiar religious melody, then something older, perhaps from the region's own folk tradition, mellowed to suit this elevated company. The music fills the space between courses, a kind of palate cleanser for the mind. And now, the next offering. Fowl. Pheasant roasted and resplendent, brought in on a wide pewter tray, garnished with dates and green herbs. Its feathers, plucked earlier for ease of preparation, have been replaced for presentation, dusted with gold leaf at the tips. Not edible, but beautiful. It is meant to dazzle, to whisper prestige. Servants, young men in modest livery, step with care. Their movements smooth, practiced. They say nothing unless addressed. They refill goblets, adjust platters, remove emptied trenchers with minimal sound. Their presence, though near invisible, holds the meal together. As the meat is carved, talk deepens. A neighboring bishopric is without a leader. A visiting cleric from Avignon has brought rumors of papal discontent. A wealthy widow has made inquiries about endowing a chapel, and the bishop's steward has drafted letters in response. This is not gossip for entertainment. It is conversation for calculation. Every remark made with tact, every pause considered. And the bishop? He listens. He is not overeager, but neither does he drift into silence. His role here is to shepherd not just the faithful, but the powerful. The air grows denser with scent, roasted meat, warmed spices, the faint sharpness of mulled wine simmering gently in a nearby pot. Someone suggests a toast, perhaps to a visiting abbot or a recent victory at court. Goblets lift. Words are spoken, not loudly but clearly, not boastfully but ceremonially. It is more than courtesy. It is reassurance. That the church is strong, that tradition endures, that even as the world trembles beyond these stone walls, here within, order is preserved. The meal is beginning to slow. Not because there is less food, but because the tone has shifted.
What began with restraint, then bloomed into warmth, is now softening again, folding back into formality, preparing for the close. Plates are cleared quietly, empty vessels exchanged for smaller ones. A servant approaches with a wide dish covered by linen. Beneath it, dessert.
In the medieval imagination, dessert was not the sugary finale we know today, but rather a cooling of the body, a settling of the humors, a gentle end. Slices of poached pear drizzled in honey, almond confections shaped into delicate spirals, crisp wafers flavored with rose water or anise, perhaps a spiced custard trembling faintly in its dish. The bishop takes a spoonful, not greedily, not absent-mindedly. He savors it. Because this too, like the sermon, like the hymn, is part of the ritual.
Wine flows again, but this time sweetened, spiced, served warm. Mulled wine, clove, cinnamon, nutmeg, carried in copper pitchers poured into heavy goblets. The warmth rises in the chest, softens the voice, brightens the cheek, and with it comes a different kind of conversation. Not politics, not doctrine, but riddles. Theological riddles were not uncommon at banquets like these. They were part game, part test, part entertainment for men trained in scripture and debate. One might begin with a soft smile. What begins before the sun walks beside man and sleeps not, even in death. A pause, a sip of wine. Another voice, low but amused. Conscience. Nods, approval. Another riddle follows, perhaps veiled commentary on church hierarchy. Perhaps something drawn from the Desert Fathers or early Christian texts. The bishop plays along. He does not dominate, he does not outshine, but when he speaks, others listen. Even his riddles carry weight. Outside, the wind has risen slightly. A shutter taps gently. The fire shifts in the hearth. But inside, the hall is steady. The walls, thick and ancient. The ceiling high, absorbing echoes. The tapestries flutter only slightly. Time feels suspended here. Not modern, not ancient. Just paused. The music returns. Now softer. No lyrics. Just the harp. Its notes fall like raindrops into a still pool. Guests lean back. Robes loosen slightly at the collar. Voices soften into murmurs. The feast is not quite finished, but it is no longer ascending. It is floating, held aloft by warmth, full bellies, and the gentle weight of shared custom. Now the feast begins to settle. Not with a bell or a loud declaration, but with a slowing of hands, a final sip, the quiet placing of goblets onto linen. Across the long table, you can feel it, that soft exhale, that shared sense of enough. A servant enters to clear the last platters, moving with a silence honed by practice. He takes with him the remains of roast fowl, the empty dishes of custard and almonds, the spent candles flickering in pools of wax. Only the largest tapers remain now, tall, steady, casting long shadows across the arched ceiling. The bishop rises slowly, not abruptly, not commendingly. He does not slam a goblet or strike a staff. Instead, he clears his throat, gently. All attention turns to him. He does not speak long. A few words, likely in Latin. A quiet thanksgiving. A blessing over those present, over the food, the musicians, the servants,
a note of gratitude to the Lord and to the order that makes such a night possible. The guests bow their heads. Some make the sign of the cross. Others simply close their eyes. It is reverent, not performative, soft, like breath on glass. And then, with little else, the evening ends. Chairs slide back with careful grace. Woolen robes rustle. A cane taps softly on the stone floor. No one hurries, but no one lingers either. The etiquette of departure is as measured as that of the meal. Outside, the air has turned colder. The sky is moonlit now. A breeze moves through the cloister gardens, rustling the dry herbs in their planters. The night smells faintly of rosemary, wax, and ash. Guests make their way to their quarters, down stone steps, through carved archways. Lanterns are lit, then dimmed. And the great hall, it returns to stillness. The echoes fade. The warmth lingers only faintly in the hearthstones. A single chair left slightly askew. Back in the kitchens, a few servants finish scrubbing the last trenchers. They murmur softly, perhaps replaying a joke they overheard or recalling the moment the bishop raised his cup. They won't taste pheasant or spiced wine. Their supper was simpler, their warmth drawn more from fire than from feast. But still, they were part of it. The rhythm, the ritual, they helped make the night unfold, quietly, invisibly. And in a small side room, the bishop sits for a moment longer, alone. His ring feels heavier now, his stomach full, his voice used, but not tired. He considers the evening, not in pride, but in reflection. Did the guests feel welcome? Were the lines between doctrine and diplomacy walked with care? He says a short prayer, unseen, unheard, and then rises, his shadow long behind him as he disappears into the corridor. This was not merely a meal, not merely a show. It was the church in miniature, a moment when the sacred and the worldly sat side by side, where scripture shared the table with sweetened pears, where silence bowed to song, where power whispered instead of roared. And now it is over. The hall sleeps, the plates are stored, the music gone. But the impression remains, not loud, not sharp, just the faint scent of spiced wine in the stone, the memory of gold in the candlelight, and the echo of laughter that never quite reached a shout. And so, dear dreamer, we come gently to the end of our journey. From the cold stones of a cloister at dawn to the smoke-sweet air of a bishop's feast at dusk, we have traced the outlines of lives shaped by silence, devotion, hunger, and ceremony. We walked slowly beside a medieval monk rising before the sun, swallowing bitter meals in shared silence, surrendering not just comfort, but identity. We stood beside Jan Hus as the flames licked higher, not with spectacle, but with clarity, his quiet defiance reaching forward through time. We leaned close to the pages of illuminated manuscripts, where jesters and saints share space, and where a tired scribe's breath still lingers in the gold leaf margins. And we sat beneath vaulted ceilings at a bishop's banquet, where theology was dressed in honey and diplomacy wore a velvet robe. Each setting different, each story distinct, and yet beneath them all, the same slow rhythm, a constant struggle for meaning, a desire for order in the face of chaos, a reaching, soft, reverent, and patient towards something greater. History, as we've seen tonight, is not always written in conquest or crowned with glory. Sometimes it hums in cloisters. It glows in ink. It rests gently on the breath of an old prayer whispered to no one. And perhaps that is why we are drawn to it in the quiet hours, not to be dazzled, but to feel connected, to remember that others have endured long nights too, that they have searched, stumbled, and soothed their anxieties in scripture, routine, and song, just as we might.
So as you settle now, perhaps wrapped in a blanket, or lying still beneath dim light, allow yourself to drift softly into sleep. Let the murmurs of Latin and lute fade into silence. Let the flicker of candlelight dim behind your eyes. You are no longer in a cold stone hall. The air no longer tastes of ash and wine. You are here, safe, still, surrounded by the soft familiarity of now. Good night, dear dreamer. Sleep well.